All right. Okay, we'll give that just a moment to come through. I'm loving seeing folks joining already on our live YouTube broadcast. So welcome everyone. Give us a shout out in the comments in the chat and let us know where you're joining from today. Oh wait, Chuck is here. He says, me and my 9 cats and my 3 dogs are ready. And Rayne just had one of her cats and my cat is here. So I think we're we're well prepared for a wonderful time today.
Come. She just gave me a look and says she does not want to be on camera right now.
Yeah, a little bit camera shy. That's understandable. So we've got, wow, Atlantic Ocean, Florida, Stony Creek, Ontario. Great to see everybody. Hey, Irv out there from South Africa. Great to see you. A lot of people from Ohio this time. We're popular in Ohio, Rayne. This is excellent.
I'm just trying to imagine where Ohio is. My knowledge of American geography is not so good. Is it sort of center-south?
Kind of central north, yeah.
Central-north, okay.
Wonderful. Oh my goodness. Look, E-Marie is here. Also part of the 9 Cat Club. And if each cat has 9 lives, look, we're not here to do math today, so I'm going to let that one go. Pat out there from Kennesaw, welcome, welcome. I am in kind of your neck of the woods. So, and today we have with us here on AutoCrit Live, fantastic, a wonderful guest, Rayne Hall. If you're not familiar with Rayne Hall, you should Google her. Here's why. Such an interesting person, author of not only her own novels and books, but an entire series called Writer's Craft. You may know those as the blue books for writers. I usually will have one by me as a prop, but I only have right now one of your regular books, one of your regular novels, but just a tremendously talented author by her own right and helping other authors, which is what she's going to do with us here today. So welcome everybody. Let's jump right in. Rayne, what do you say? Do you want to talk a little bit more about you? And then I think we're going to talk today about settings and how to use them effectively in a short story, especially because it's tricky.
Yes. Now, you've asked where people are from. I have to say I'm from Bulgaria. Now, I'm not expecting everyone to know where Bulgaria is either, because your European geography may be about as good as my American.
I had to Google it last time.
So, Bulgaria is in Eastern Europe. It's one of those former communist countries. And it's beautiful. Now, outside in my garden, you can hear the crickets chirp, you can hear the birds twitter, the stork's bills are clattering. Then there are the goat's bells tinkling as the shepherds drive their flock past, the clip-clop of horse carts. Lots of dogs are barking, including mine. And there are these softly undulating hills with big snow-capped mountains in the distance. We have at the moment a lot of fruit trees in blossom, especially the apple trees and quince trees. There are these delicate white and pink blossoms everywhere. The grass in the meadows is really high and I have to mow it every day with bright red poppies, bright yellow dandelions. Then there are the dark purple delphiniums. Okay, I'm telling you about this just to give you a feeling for the setting where I am. Okay, over to you.
That's wonderful. And I loved the descriptions that you were just giving, because today we're talking all about settings, and in such a rich, gorgeous country, rich with settings that can be viewed in different ways, depending on the mood you want to create. And I know, Rayne, one of your specialties is Gothic setting,
Yes.
and especially Gothic horror. And as we're striving to create a new subgenre, Bulgarian Gothic horror. So start writing, everyone who's watching. We want to see more Bulgarian horror stories from our viewers out there. Talk to us a little bit, Rayne, about how you've been able to use your surroundings to evoke feelings and describe settings without boring the reader, and just kind of how you choose settings. I'm just going to let you take it away. And as we start, if anyone has questions for Rayne, do pop them in our chat, and we'll be taking questions along the way. And then at the end, we'll try to save time, but often we get carried away. So just pop your questions in the chat. With that, Rayne, I know you have a lot of great information to share with us, so please take it away.
Okay, how I get inspiration from the setting. Often my stories start with an idea for a setting. I go to some place and I think, that's weird, or that's creepy, or this is beautiful, or awesome, sublime, whatever. And I think, what kind of person might come here, and why, and what do they want? And why don't they leave when things get difficult? And then I think, what kind of problems might they encounter here? What do they want? What do they need? What do they do? And I let them interact with the setting. Now, for me, the setting is actually often the very first inspiration. But it can also come later when I already have an idea for a story plot. And then I think, in what kind of setting might this story play out so that it is really exciting, that it's unusual, that it stands out from the mass of stories that competition judges and anthology editors and magazine editors get. What kind of setting would bring out the best in a story? What kind of setting will incite the characters to take action? What kind of setting will make it difficult for the characters to take the action that they need? And I think most of you now are at the stage where you already have an idea for a story, and you've already probably developed quite a bit of the plot, and you already know quite a bit about the characters. So now it's time to choose the setting. I imagine that you already have an idea of the setting too, but probably it's not a brilliant wow setting yet. And probably for most of your stories in progress, it's not really a character yet, and you probably haven't used it to the full yet. So am I right there with my guess for most of you?
So we're on day 3 of our short story challenge, and I would agree with you, Rayne. I believe most of our participants probably already have an idea of the plot and the storyline. So it's the perfect time to think about how you can use setting to advance that story. You know, we've done a few series or a few shows on story prompts and brainstorming and getting ideas, but now is the time to take that capsule of an idea and try it in those different settings to see, just as Rayne was mentioning, how your characters would interact with it and what sort of conflicts or obstacles might arise that involve the setting to make it really interesting and differentiate you from some of the other competitor stories. So I agree completely,
Yeah.
Rayne.
So this afternoon I was sitting outside, listening to the hum of the bees, and I was walking through my meadow and walking across the wildflowers, the wild chamomile releasing its beautiful scent. And I was thinking, how can I teach you to write great settings? Or rather, not really teach you, but what kind of tips can I give you that you can use? The kind of techniques that professional writers use. Because with setting, you can do amazing things. So I thought I'll just jot down a few ideas, just some professional tips.
Wonderful.
So I got them all written down, and
note cards. We all love note
I
cards.
will from time to time look at them as prompts, but mostly I'll just look and I'll see what kind of questions you have. Now, the very first thing is make your setting a specific place. Many writers, when they write a story, they set it in a living room, a restaurant, a small town, some generic small town, some generic restaurant, and that's flat. Be as specific as you can. A small town in the heat of August in Israel is very different from a small town in the Scottish lowlands during a rainy November day.
Yeah.
Now, if you just have a generic setting, just any small town at any time, you're losing something. It's just bland. It's boring. Won't stand out. But as soon as you choose a very specific setting, the story immediately becomes more interesting. And this is especially important if you are submitting to anthologies. And I strongly advise all writers to submit stories to anthologies, genre anthologies, because that's where you'll get discovered. When you submit a story to an anthology, it needs to meet the theme. So the anthology editors see dozens, hundreds of very similar stories about this theme. And if you have a very specific setting, that immediately stands out from the rest. The same applies to competitions, writing competitions.
Absolutely.
They all have a theme. And if you have a generic setting, you won't stand out. Well, you may stand out on other grounds, of course. You may just have a much better plot than everyone else, or a better character, or whatever. But the setting is one of the ways how you can really, really stand out. So choose a specific setting. Make it as specific as you can.
And the idea behind that, Rayne, is that those specific details will make it more immersive for the reader. Is that the idea there?
More immersive, more realistic, and more interesting. You're basically taking the reader on a journey to a strange, exotic place they've never been. If you take them to, let's say, a rainy day in November in Scotland. Most readers have never been in Scotland, let alone on a rainy day. Most people have never been in Israel on a scorching August day. This is a chance for the reader to basically travel the world, to see places they've never seen before, they would never have get the chance to see. This way, they are getting to explore places from the safety of their armchair. They don't actually have to go to the expense of traveling. They don't have to take 2 weeks off from work. They don't need to risk the malaria-infested swamps or whatever you're taking them to. So they are perfectly safe. So this is just much more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Take the readers to those places, let them see them. I remember I was coaching some writers once, and I said, use your own setting, the place where you live. Obviously, that doesn't suit every story, but if possible, model the place where your story is set on the place where you live, because you can write about this with fantastic authenticity, and the readers feel that authenticity, and you won't make any stupid mistakes. No silly blunders where readers can catch you out on. And it will be realistic, it will be interesting. And then one of the students in the class said, "Oh no, I live in Jakarta, Indonesia. Who would want to read a story set there? I'm going to write a story set in New York. That's much more exciting." Have you been to New York? No. But New York is much more exciting. I'm going to set a story there. And I tried to tell her, well, actually, most readers would be very keen to read a story set in Indonesia.
Absolutely. I would. I know I would.
When I talk to Bulgarian writers, many of them say, "Oh, Bulgaria is boring. Who wants to read about Bulgaria?" And I say, hey, you live in Bulgaria, let the world know what Bulgaria is like. I certainly write my stories set in Bulgaria, and that's one of the reasons why they are interesting. So you may think that your location is dull because you experience it every day. But for the rest of the world, for almost everyone else, this is an exotic, unusual place. So make the most of it.
It really is.
And right now, you are under some time pressure to produce the story. So you don't have much time to research the location. Why not just use the one you know inside out already?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a terrific tip. Given that this challenge is only 2 weeks long, the time that we would normally advise to do your research and immerse yourself in the imagery and culture, etc., we may not have it. So there may be ways to take things and settings, and whether it's nature or a building or a town or a magical world that you're already familiar with, to incorporate that into a short story, because that timeline is so short. Do you have tips on how to research settings quickly, or would we save that research for our longer works, Rayne?
Research quickly. Well, go down to the pub. Seriously, when you need to research a setting, and your story is set perhaps in a place where you cannot go, say you've written about the Amazon jungle, and you're in New York City. You can't quickly pop over into the Amazon jungle. So what you do is go to some location that has something in common with what you're writing, like go to the park. Or if you've written about a historical story set in a medieval tavern, well, you can't time travel to a medieval tavern, but you can go to your local pub or bar or whatever you have near where you live. And then go there and listen to the noises. It's amazing how many sounds you hear. Now, normally when you go to the pub or the park or wherever, you won't consciously observe the noises. You won't notice them. But when you go there as a writer and you listen, then you hear all those many sounds. Write them all down and insert them in different places in your story. And very important, try to notice some smells. There is nothing which creates and evokes setting as much as smells do. And I'll talk more about that later, so remind me.
No, absolutely.
You can also eavesdrop on people's conversations.
Which is always fun, even if you're not
researching. It's always fun. The danger with that is sometimes this grows out of setting and becomes a story in itself, because those conversations are so interesting.
Yeah. Take your notes.
Just use these snippets of overt conversations like background noise. So just go and take notes and observe things, and go to the kind of place that's nearest to what the setting of your story is. And one more thing, I advise you to use real locations if possible, to save research time. It may be a good idea to change the name of the village, please. Otherwise, you might possibly be in trouble if in your story the mayor is a corrupt villain. You don't want that sort of thing.
We don't want to run afoul of that. You can fictionalize a real location and protect some.
Also, with a fictional location, you can take liberties. You can have a magical temple there, or you can decide that there is a pond where you want one, because there has to be a drowning in your story, so you put in the pond, and maybe there is a lighthouse or anything. In a fictional location, you can invent things, but make it as similar as you can to a location you know really well, preferably the one on your doorstep.
Wonderful. And I see a quick comment in the chat coming through that doesn't all of this really apply to fantasy more than any other genre. Our commenter says, I'm trying to think of Kafka, for example, and can't really think of elaborate descriptions of nature. But remember that setting and what we're talking about today is much, much more than just the nature aspect. We opened our show today with some terrific descriptions of grasses and goats and flowers, but there's also sights and smells indoors, the physical building itself,
Yeah.
the magical
or
world.
your story may be set in an inner city slum area. It can be set in a wine cellar. It can be set in a factory. It can be set in a farm kitchen. It can be set absolutely anywhere. And the same applies. Listen to sounds, listen and pay attention to smells.
Smells are so powerful.
Also use other senses. Any kind of setting. Whenever I get the opportunity to go to some weird place, strange place, I take notes, even if I don't have plans for a story yet. So if I get a chance to go into a cave or on top of a cliff or an abandoned factory or yes, even when I go into a hospital or go into one of those 1970s concrete blocks which housed the officialdom of the Communist Party apparatus, I write about all the details. Just think of what are the floors like, or the walls, the doors, what kind of signs are there on the doors, what kind of graffiti are there. That's always good for urban settings. What is graffiti? What kind of rubbish is lying around on the ground? Use all this.
And I think we have several viewers who unfortunately are still in some form of a pandemic lockdown or restrictive movement.
Yeah.
So think about other ways that you can do your research. We've had a suggestion or two already in the chat around Google Earth, which is tremendous.
Yes.
Google overall, but Google Earth in particular can be incredibly helpful.
Yeah. But use it only to supplement things, because Google Earth, it will not give you the sounds, it will not give you the smells, it will not give you the experience of touching things, of the temperature. By all means, use your imagination, use your memory. If it's a place where you really cannot go yourself, then you can read people's blogs, you can read about eyewitness accounts of people who've been there, or you can just open your window and listen. Inhale the smells. They may be just very faint. Listen to the sounds. You can get quite a lot there. Or
I also really like using YouTube videos. Travel, especially if I'm researching a place that's not nearby me and it needs to be set. The Israel example is perfect. I've been watching a lot of videos of that. And the travel videos where they're less formal, they're not the polished hotel, it's real people and their real experiences, and it can be quite powerful, coupled with, of course, your own imagination, because as Rayne mentions, the sounds, the heat, the air pressure won't come across, but some other great ways to do some research.
Now, you mentioned the more informal travel videos. I prefer those two, because with them, if they don't have the sound edited, you can actually hear what the place sounds like.
In real life. If there are goats on the road, you're going to see goats on the road and hear them and hear their bells tinkling and hear the shepherds shouting. It's fun. It's really fun. It's fun as a hobby just to watch, but especially for research.
But I have to warn you here. Once you start watching YouTube videos, you can get carried away and you spend your time watching YouTube videos instead of writing.
Guilty. So sometimes we recommend, especially in a time-sensitive challenge, or if you have the tendency to get carried away with world building and research at the cost of actually doing the writing, which is the important bit. Set a timer for yourself. Set a timer for 15 minutes. Do 15 minutes of research or YouTube video watching. And for those 15 minutes, you're committed to that task. You're doing your research quickly, focused, and not watching cat videos unless they're relevant.
Oh, yes, that's the thing. YouTube, after you've spent a lot of time watching all those exciting videos about your location, such as other locations, so you watch those two just in case, and then suddenly they pop up all these cute cat videos, and it's just have to watch them, and this one, and that one, and then there are other cute dogs too, and all those dog and cat rescue stories. Oh, yes, I carried away there. Oh, I think we've got lots of questions here, I just see. If you use your local pub for a location, do you have to change its names? I would advise that, yes. Invent a pub. A story I've written, the settings aren't those of nature. Well, there's The Devil You Know. That's set in a railway station. Then, gosh, I can't think of the title of that story. The one set in London. At night, going through this grotty area. At the beginning of 30 Scary Tales. And then I have written quite a few indoor stories, like In the Gothic Chair is an indoor story.
I was just about to recommend that one.
The Christmas Shadow is set indoors. And I've also written stories set in, factories and all sorts of places.
Yes. So certainly we can be indoors or outdoors or on. I think my colleague Gareth has been recently very inspired to write a story based on an oil rig. So that's a longer term project for him because he's doing a lot of research. But having various locations, we were thinking about setting in particular, it doesn't have to be in a field. It can, of course, be in a field, but think about all the sensory inputs that you get indoors, outdoors, in a vehicle, in a confined space.
Yes. Okay. And confined spaces are very good plot devices because when you write a story, there is always a thing when things get difficult, when there are arguments, danger, whatever. Why doesn't the character just leave? Now, if it's a confined space and they can't get out, there is that plot problem solved.
Right? Why don't they just leave?
I've, for example, written a story where the characters were confined in the car of a funicular railway or places like that, where they couldn't get out. They were confined, several characters in a tight space. Tempers were rising. They were arguing. There were danger. There was a werewolf on board. They couldn't get out. If they could just get out, well, there would be no problem. It wouldn't be very
then there wouldn't be that tension and that conflict, and it's a flat story, right? Why don't they just leave? And they leave, and that's not a fun story.
It would be, at the very least, it wouldn't be a very plausible story if the characters just stay there, or you'd have to find a really good reason to make them stay. But it's much easier if you just kind of lock them up in a place where they can't get out.
Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned the senses. Now, senses are so important. New writers tend to focus just on one side, on one sense, the sense of seeing. 99% of their descriptions are seen. But there are many more senses. Now, the ancient Greeks believed that there were 5. And that's often what you still see quoted, the 5 senses. But in reality, there are far more senses. Depending on which scientist you pay attention to, there are 13 or 22 or whatever, more than 5 anyway.
Much more than 5.
Yeah. Now, of course, there is seeing, which is what writers mostly use. Hearing, very common and very effective. Smell. Then there is touch, which is also very useful in writing. Taste, which quite frankly does not suit every story and scene.
Mm-mm.
But there's also temperature, the sense of temperature. Very useful in story writing. You can make the weather get hotter, colder. You can have the characters sweat and shiver. Great. The sense of pain, which is sometimes related to touch, but not always. If you get a bellyache, that has nothing to do with touch. Then there is a sense of balance and many more. So use senses. Don't just use the sense of seeing. Mix them up, and you can choose whichever senses suit your story and your scene best. But I would say at least 3, better 4. Any that you like. Include the sense of taste if the story takes place in a restaurant. But if they are not eating or drinking something, skip that one and use a different one.
Are there too many senses to use? You mentioned 3 or 4. We wouldn't want to just overload, especially in a short story with our limited word count. We wouldn't want to overload with too many, would we?
No limit how many. If it fits the story, if it helps create the setting, plot, atmosphere, whatever, use it.
Okay.
Just select whichever works best. Now, I personally find using 3 or 4 senses works best for my stories. But if you find that your stories work best with 6 different senses, go for it.
So we've got a couple of questions in the chat around, should short stories, considering that they are short, should they stay in one setting, or can it start in one and end in another? What say you?
You can do whatever you want. I find that if I need to keep a short story short, I plot it so that it takes place in a single place. That makes the story much, much shorter. And that is useful if you're writing, say, flash fiction, or if you are writing a story for a contest which has a specific word count, or if you're participating in a writing challenge and want to make sure your story is short enough that you can write it within that time. Or if your stories, like mine, have a habit of growing longer and longer and longer because they have ambitions to become a novel, then just putting them into a single location helps. Now, not all stories can be told in a single location. In this case, choose 2 locations close together if possible.
Mm-hmm.
The boat and the harbor. The kitchen and the cowshed. So not very far apart. And use as many as you need, but as few as possible. Quite simply, the fewer locations you use, the shorter the story.
Mm-hmm. That's terrific advice.
Try and make that early on, while you're still at the draft stage. Try to arrange it so that you have as few settings as possible. Because once you've completed the story and then try to shorten it by combining settings, that's a lot of work. So do it first.
I can imagine that would be. And conversely, Rayne, would it then apply that you can lengthen a story? If you have a short story, as I know many of your stories long to become a novel, and so they tend to expand, is it a practical way to expand your story to add more far-flung settings if it works in the story itself? Or
I would not use this as a main technique for lengthening the story. I think I would look at creating subplots which are related to the main plot. Maybe an additional character who has their own agenda. And this will quite naturally then perhaps involve another setting. But I wouldn't insert another setting just for the sake of lengthening the story. I think this would probably not be a good idea.
That makes sense.
Having said that, if you think it's a good idea for your story, do it. Now, before I forget, I promised to tell you about smells.
Yes.
Now, smells are the miracle weapon for a writer when it comes to senses.
You're hearing the secrets here first, everyone.
if you just mention 2 smells, the reader experiences the setting already. You don't need to write 2 pages of visual descriptions. I've written down some examples here. The room smelled of pizza and unwashed socks. You can see that room. You get an idea of what
I'm
it's
definitely
like.
in a college dorm room at that moment.
Yes, you get an idea of who lives in that room, don't you? The room smelled of boiled cabbage and disinfectant.
Oh,
That brings up quite a different
very different
idea.
vibe.
So if, let's say, you are visiting an old people's home, and well, you write about the character visiting an old people's home, and you mention that the place smelled of boiled cabbage and disinfectant, you get an idea of what kind of place it is. The room smelled of beeswax and patchouli. Okay, completely different character, completely different location.
Completely
When you
different.
say the room smell of beeswax and patchouli, you can probably see the essential oil burner and the candles.
Yes, yes.
Probably sort of Indian wall hangings, a bit new age.
Yes.
The room smelled of hairspray and bubblegum.
I get pink
Quite a different
vibes.
one.
I get fuzzy pillows.
The room smelled of, may I offer 2 more, because I've written 2 more down. The room smelled of stale urine and cigarette smoke.
Wow, that's an old bar or an alley or
Probably I picture sort of an underpass.
Good one.
Or perhaps a place leading to an underground car park or something like that. Smelled of cinnamon and freshly baked bread.
That's mom's kitchen, grandma's kitchen, sunny, bright.
Exactly. And if you just mention 2 smells, that takes you 1 single sentence. And this brings up all sorts of memories and ideas in the reader's mind, and you don't have to write lengthy descriptions at all. If you use just the smells, the setting is already there and alive, and the reader is there, because there is no sense as evocative as the sense of smell. Now, of course, the sense of smell isn't the only sense that I'm using, but this is one of the tricks I want to share with you. Really use it. And important, use it in the right place. You have to use this sentence the moment the character enters a new location. Okay.
That's the most likely time that the character would notice the smell. Plus,
Yes,
it really anchors your reader right away in the setting.
Yes, it is the most realistic moment for a character to notice smells, because when we've been in a place for a while, we don't notice the smells anymore. But the moment we open the door and go in or out or whatever, that's when we notice it. So this is how you are making your story realistic.
That's a terrific tip. Very powerful tool.
I'm just reading some of the questions here. Or should I leave that to you? Will you read them? And
no, I think we can both read. I was just looking at Melissa's question around her story being set in a town just outside of where she lives, which is terrific. There's a robbery at a jewelry store, and she made up the name of the jewelry store. Is that okay, or should I use a real one? Definitely change it.
Yes,
I don't want to run afoul, but a great opportunity to learn, make sure you know how jewelry stores operate on the inside. If your story is going to take place inside that setting, where's the safe? How do they lock the display cabinets? What type of jewelry, is popular and sparkling everywhere. So yeah, definitely change the name. Good question with that.
I see some nice ideas for smells already. Great. Great, yes.
Mm-hmm. Musty basements are very evocative. Smell smoke in an old dingy motel room. We can already see exactly how evocative and triggering these are.
Yes. So use this. It's such an effective trick, and it takes a single sentence. Won't take you much time at all. Now, I would also say the background noises are very useful. There is always noise wherever you go. There's never complete silence. Make a whole list of background noises. Whether it's, if you're in nature, there may be birds chirping and the good bells tickling or whatever. There may be the wind rustling through the trees. In an urban setting, there may be water gurgling down the pipe, car doors slamming. There may be an elevator going up the shaft or whatever. You can hear those sounds. And in any place, there are probably 10 or 20 background noises, which you normally don't notice. Write a whole list of them and then use them throughout your story. Sprinkle them throughout the scene, especially when you want to describe silence. Instead of saying, she fell silent, or there was a pause in the conversation, you write, somewhere in the distance a car door slammed. This indicates that there is a break in the conversation and you don't have to say, oh, she was silent. He waited for her reply. Just insert those, and you can also use that to increase the suspense. When the main character is waiting for something to happen, and then you mention somewhere in the distance a seagull screeched or whatever, that just heightens the suspense because the reader is waiting, and at the same time there's something happening. There is some atmosphere, some action. It works beautifully. And another trick, okay, this is a professional trick to use. When you decide how much setting to describe, I always say you don't need to describe a lot, you just need to choose the right details. And one of the details I say is describe the ground, whether that's outdoors or indoors. Let's say you're walking along the street. Well, your character is walking along the street. So there's asphalt. Is this asphalt blotched with white seagull droppings or with old black blobs of chewing gum? Are there lots of cigarette butts littering the pavement or American sidewalk? Is there pollen from trees lying around or plastic wrappers from snacks? Are there, in the corners, are there hypodermic syringes lying or whatever? It tells so much about the place. Indoors, is this expensive Persian carpet? Is it maybe one of those fluffy flucati carpets and it is full of food crumbs? Is it if you're in an office, it's probably this gray corporate carpet, but is this stained, threadbare, where the wheels from the office chair have rolled, or is it very new? Is there, if it's a tiled floor, does it have sort of calcified rims? And is between the tiles, the grout, is it gray and moldy, or are the tiles sparkling, clean, shiny ceramics? When you walk across the grass, is it, we're outdoors now, is this manicured lawn which looks precisely striped and not a single weed or flower inside because they've all been chemically killed and everything mowed with precision? Or is it a mishmash of weeds and flowers and actually should have been mowed long ago, but obviously the people who live there have never had time to do that or are not interested or whatever? Just describe the ground, whatever you see there. Just describe the ground. Again, one sentence, and it tells us a lot about that place.
It really does. And I think this conversation alludes a little bit to a question that Jane had in the comments about, is there in a short story a percentage? Like, is there a rule of thumb for how much content should be related to the setting versus the characters versus the act? Yeah.
Not at all. That depends completely on the author. There are some authors write descriptions a lot of setting descriptions, because the setting plays a big role, because the lush descriptions are part of the author voice. I'm certainly one of those authors who use a lot of setting descriptions. Other authors use very little.
And
There's no right or wrong. You choose what works for you.
It very much brings to mind, I just grabbed this other book. This is Weird and Other Derelictions from Adam Neville. He's a horror author. These stories have no characters. These are all just settings. It's a very brave piece, and it's magnificent.
Settings, no characters. Now I'm curious. I can't even imagine how that works. I'll have to read that.
It is as if you as the reader are visiting after all the action has taken place. I mean, he just does such a tremendous job. But that's an extreme example of the fact that, yes, there are no rules about how much setting should be in your story. I think the things to think about that Rayne has already mentioned are, anchor the reader, give them something that triggers emotions and visual inner visuals, what's it called? Their mind's eye, very quickly. And think about how important whatever it is that you're describing is to the story. If it's helping to anchor or set them, yeah.
Yes, I would say there's no percentage, but it's how you present it. Novice writers often write a big chunk of description and bang it at the beginning of the story. So they have paragraphs of description, and then the actual story plays out. And then at the next scene, there's again lots of description, and then the story. Instead, weave them together, weave the descriptions into the story. Like I mentioned, the sound effects, the background noises. You can weave them into the story here and there. And I would say no more than one paragraph of description at any one time. Possibly two, but not more, because when there is lengthy description, readers just skip it. So you might just as well not write it. And readers do not need to be told everything. They don't need to really know that this item is to the left of that item and is so and so high and this and that color. And just pick a few details and choose telling details. And don't put it all at the beginning of a scene.
We talk a lot about exposition and info dumps, and all of what Rayne's talking about right now would kind of fall into that category. What you're doing is just building up, like bringing them up to speed. Okay, you're in this room and it's square and it's brown and it's got white ceilings. All those details may not even be necessary, as the author will know more about the room and the setting, just the same as we know more about the characters, etc., than what we necessarily need to tell. Let the reader have some agency and point out some things.
Yes. Okay, you've said don't describe everything the author knows is there. Let the reader kind of decide what they need. But I would say there is a third person who is more important. That's the point of view character.
No,
when the point of view character goes into that setting, what does he or she notice? That's what you need to write down. Let's say you enter a room, right? And there are several hundred things in that room. Everyone will notice something different. If the point of view character is a musician, of course he will see the guitar. If he is a florist, of course, he will see the potted plants and the flower arrangements. If he's a health and safety inspector, even if it's his day off, he's just visiting a friend, but if he's a health and safety inspector, he will see those cables trailing across the floor, which nobody else will notice. If he's a cleaner who cleans rooms for a living, even if he's just visiting a friend, I guarantee he will see the dust in the corners by the door. So people notice different things. Outdoors, walking in a road, An architect, what he will see is the shape and style of the buildings. Whereas a young mum will see, well, the children's play equipment and the prams. So everyone notices different things, whether these are needed for the plot or not. If the point of view character notices them, mention them.
What a tremendous tip. That makes so much sense. And that is, as we do our character building and research and their likes, dislikes, desires, experiences, what has shaped them, exactly what Rayne said. Be true to what the character would do or notice or experience or say.
Yes.
Wonderful. Did you have more note cards for us, Rayne? Did we?
Yes, I'm just looking
Yes.
at there's so many things I want to share with you.
Wonderful.
Some professional tips. Okay, the weather. That's a mistake most writers make, is that they have generic weather, bland weather. The weather is okay. If it plays any role at all, it's sort of, well, nice. Choose interesting weather. If possible, kind of unpleasant, slightly unpleasant. Or in some way extreme, let there be a heat wave, let there be a downpour, or even if it's a cold, slushy drizzle, sort of London weather with grey skies, or let there be ice cold with snow and freezing and characters walk on frozen roads or through knee-deep snow. Use the weather, choose specific weather. And now watch. Let the weather change a bit during the story. Whenever you reach a boring point in your story, but you just have to write that scene. It's not particularly exciting, that scene, but you need it. So you're looking for a way to give it a bit of oomph. Well, change the weather. That immediately makes something happen. Make the weather worse if possible. So if previously there was wind, now there is storm. If previously it was hot, now it's sweltering. If previously there was a sort of a drifting snow, now there's a blizzard. Yeah? So change the weather. Or even if just the characters are out walking in the park, just bring on a downpour. And the characters have to react to that. They have to, dash into a dry place or home or whatever, and they have to react to that, and that just makes everything more interesting. And now I'm going to show you how to take this even further. During the climax of your story, make the weather unbearable. Whatever weather you've set up, whether it's a hot summer day or cold winter or drizzling rain or whatever, make the weather as extreme as you can during the climax of your story, because that will intensify everything. It will intensify the moods, it will intensify the dangers, it will intensify the problems, it will intensify the arguments. It just increases everything. So use that.
I've got my notes down here. I'm trying to be sneaky and write notes. So.
Also for the climax, if your story takes place in several different locations, let the climax take place in a dangerous location. Even if it's a subtle, gentle romance story, let it take place in a dangerous location, that climax. Just give it extra oomph. How are we doing for time? I've got some more cards, but on the other hand, there are also lots of questions.
We have about 5 minutes left in our time today, and I see a lot of comments and chats, and I love how the challenge community is coming together here. We're mostly caught up with the questions related to kind of incorporating scenes or incorporating setting into your short story. I'm just going to give a quick scroll through. We've really hit a home run, Rayne, with the tips about smell. It has a really. Daryl says I can use the car door slam in my story. Absolutely, yes. Rayne, your tip about using a distant sound as a pause instead of saying she paused. That's brilliant. I really enjoy when authors do that. So I highly recommend it. I think we're doing quite well. So let's move ahead with another card, if you will.
Okay. One thing here is, don't describe the setting as something static. Let the characters interact with the setting somehow. So
Yes.
instead of describing there was a table in the room and there was a tree, let the reader do something, not the reader, the character do something with the setting or in the setting. Let's say instead of saying there was a chair, he pushed the chair aside. Instead of there was this beautiful green synthetic wheat-killed lawn, show the character run across the lawn instead of the field of gravel, let the character fall down, stumble and fall on the gravel. Just whatever it is, let them interact somehow. Either the character does something with the environment, or the environment does something to the character, or they are somehow interacting, or the character, at the very least, that the character move through the setting,
Yes.
so that they become entwined. Wherever you can do that, do that.
And I think someone had mentioned, I'm just looking for that in the comments, someone had mentioned that a lot of their setting is revealed through character personality. And that goes, I think, to hand in hand with what Ray mentioned earlier around whatever your character would notice in the room.
Yes.
It's perfect. That reveals your character personality as well as the setting.
Exactly. You can use the setting to tell us a lot about the character, about the point of view character, through what that character observes, and also about other characters. For example, you can tell us about the occupant of a room by telling us what that room looks like or smells like. We learn a lot. Remember when I said the room smelled of pizza and unwashed socks? That tells us a lot about that character who lives there.
Wonderful. And then our last question for today, Melissa is asking, my story's in the third person form. Is this form harder to put into a scene? What are your thoughts on that?
Not at all.
Yeah. I think it is all because it's really focusing on your point of view character, whomever that is, should be through their lens, whatever experiences and items have colored their view of the world, and their own experiences will just come through in how they see the setting and how they're interacting with the setting.
Yeah.
So wonderful. Terrific conversation today, Rayne. Thank you everyone for joining, and thanks for all your wonderful questions. I think we got to all of them. If not, feel free to drop us an email. Rayne, if you have other tips that we didn't get to, because I know you had several for us.
Yes.
You know what? If you want to send those over, we can do some posts with those in there, and just keep sharing these wonderful tips on incorporating setting into your short story or into your longer form story. Just because this particular session is related to our community writing challenge, these tips will serve you well regardless of the form that you're writing. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you so much, Rayne. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Okay, now there are some people, I think, from different countries. Let me just see. Berlin, auf Wiedersehen.
Scotland was here. We had someone from the Caribbean. We have viewers calling for an encore already, so that might be something that we can put together for you. In the meantime, have a look at our community writing challenge. For tomorrow, to round out week 1, we'll be hosting a write-in, and that will be out here on YouTube as well. We're not going to do prompts for this write-in as we typically do, because we want you to focus on what your story needs. So we'll be doing that tomorrow, 1 o'clock Eastern, right here on YouTube with AutoCrit Live as part of our Community Writing Challenge. Again, thank you so much, Rayne. It's always a pleasure, and we will see you all soon. Thanks.
Ciao, ciao. No, that's good, Ariel.